Today, I want to talk about the legendary tier German destroyer Z-52, which is available in the game now as a free bureau project. We're going to run down the stats of the ship. I'll tell you how it plays and whether I think it's worth pursuing. Short answer is it is very good in a specified role, and that is countering other enemy destroyers. And so it is probably worth going through the Bureau project and picking up as soon as possible. There aren't many other destroyers at this tier with these kind of capabilities. It all comes down to one thing, a consumable, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And also, I should note that I'm showing you this game because I think it demonstrates the anti-destroyer capabilities of this vessel quite well. Also, it's a close game where the result is not apparent until the last few minutes or last few seconds even. And that's kind of rare these days. I like to put those games on YouTube, so maybe we'll talk about that a little bit too. But before we get there, the stats on the Z-52. Keep in mind that all the stats I read you here are going to be influenced by my commander build. I'm running Eric Bai with all the gun skills selected and Anton Gurin and Decepticon Rumble as two inspirations. Gurin buffs the AP penetration, Rumble buffs the range of the guns. This build is much more designed for the Elbing and the Felix Schultz using Bai. Didn't really want to change it up too much for this thing because I prefer playing those destroyers a little bit more. But it works on this ship. Certainly buffing the guns is not a bad thing. In fact, it's the guns that get us the first blood medal against that Shimakaze, who we did not really spot or counter in any kind of meaningful way. But don't worry, we'll get there. In any case, the Z-52, it's got 20,800 HP, which is fine. You could, of course, buff the HP pool by using William Sims as an inspiration, but I have not done that. The armor is nothing special. The Elbing and the Felix Schultz both get 25mm plating on their ship. And that 25mm is significant because it can shatter a lot of destroyer HE. Z-52 has conventional destroyer armor, meaning it's 19mm everywhere, and so you don't have any thick armor plating that is going to be, shattering HE. By the way, here we get an example of the counter-destroyer play. We're using the consumable that does it. You can see we've got the sonar active. The duration is just about 2 minutes. It's spotting this Kleber. In fact, we got spotted first, which prompted us to put the sonar into effect. And now, the Kleber, who I think was trying to ambush me, is the one getting ambushed. He can't see us inside of the smoke screen. We've taken away most of his HP. Note we're shooting AP at his side, by the way, and I'll talk about that in a second. But Kleber goes down for our second kill of the game. As for how we spotted him, this sonar has a unique gimmick. We've got 2 charges of it. The duration is 122 seconds. Takes 180 seconds to reload, so that's quite a long time. Detection of torpedoes is 4 km, but crucially, detection of ships is 5.9 km. And because of the choices on my commander, I'm using the mortar skill on Bay, or Bai, however you pronounce his name. That means my concealment is not great. It's actually 5.9 kilometers by sea, meaning anytime I get spotted, like I was by that Kleber, I can simply pop the sonar and I'm guaranteed to reveal whatever it is that's spotting me. It's almost like stealth radar, except on the sonar consumable. And if you wanted to, if you didn't want to go with the mortar skill on Bai, which honestly I don't necessarily recommend for this particular vessel, if you wanted to go without that skill and buff the concealment more, I'm sure you could get this thing down to 5.5, 5.4, low 5 kilometer range, and then you would have stealth sonar, which is quite valuable, I think. As for the guns, though, we've got actually 6 128mm guns, which is maybe a little bit weird. This is, after all, the successor to the Z-23 at Tier 7, which has cruiser-sized 150mm guns. This is down to the 128s of the Moss that preceded that ship. But since they're smaller guns, they do reload a little bit quicker than you would expect 150mm guns to reload. I've got that time down to 3.2 seconds, although that is with Bai's commander skills that reduce the reload time, and it's with the reload module in the fourth slot. 180-degree turn time is a snappy 11.8 seconds, and then the shell damage characteristics are influenced by the mortar skill. Each shell type, HE and AP, gets a 13% damage buff because of that skill. And as such, our HE does a maximum of 1,695 damage, which is actually pretty bad, and primarily the reason I was shooting AP at that Kleber. Without the mortar skill, I think it's 1,600 even, or maybe 1,500. That's not a lot. That's actually extremely low compared to basically any other destroyer HE. And that is the typical characteristic of German high explosive in this game. Reason for it is because these guns probably get quarter pen, which allows them to pen 32 millimeters of armor with their HE. That sounds impressive, of course, but in order to compensate for that gimmick, that advantage, the HE alpha is very low at 1,695. So if you're shooting it at enemy destroyers, you kind of notice that their HP is going down a little bit more slowly than you would expect. And that is because these HE shells simply don't do all that much damage, which is why it might be better to switch to AP. When shooting at broadside enemy destroyers, you're probably going to get a lot more damage, especially if the destroyer is slightly angled and the shells achieve a full penetration rather than overpen. You see there that salvo does 3,000 damage to that angled Z-44, much more than any HE salvo we shoot is going to do. Although if you get all the HE shells to connect, it's not like the damage is terrible, but it's something to keep in mind because most destroyers have more HE alpha than this thing, and so they might be better positioned to win against you in a gunfight. I've had that happen, actually. I was ganged up by 2 Hollands in another game that I think I might show you because it demonstrates some good fundamentals of destroyer play, but we'll save that for another day. As for the AP, it does a maximum of 3,390 damage, that is with the mortar skill, and so as such, well, it can be more effective even against broadside destroyers. Torpedoes, it's got those too, and the characteristics here are all right. We've got 8 torpedoes set in 2 quadruple launchers amidships. They can launch off either side. They reload in a very snappy 85 seconds, which is very, very quick. Quite characteristic of the German torps, actually. And also characteristic of the German torps, they don't do a whole ton of damage when they make contact with the enemy. They hit for 14,400 damage, and they have a very stealthy 1.4 kilometer sea detectability, which is nice. On top of that, they've got a 69 knot speed, so they're not the most dodgeable torpedoes in the world. You can see a couple of them make contact against that battleship over there. And here we spot the Z-44 once again with the sonar gimmick. Now this is going to demonstrate something useful about this sonar gimmick too, which is even if you are not able to sink the enemy destroyer that you're spotting, because we can't, that Z-44 is behind an island, we still have a 5.9 kilometer ship detection range, and the sonar effectively, at least compared to something like radar, lasts forever. So unless the destroyer actually gets out of the range, he's going to be perma-spotted for the next minute and 25 seconds, which is more than enough time to allow our teammate to actually take him out. And that's something to keep in mind too, especially because a lot of cap circles in this game are small enough that you can actually be outside of them and have the sonar covering the entirety of the cap, guaranteeing that if a destroyer enters it, you will be able to spot them. In any case, torpedoes, I think I said they do 69 knots. They also have a range of 10.5 kilometers, which is respectable. AA Characteristics, I don't even think there's a point in going into those. Nothing really special here. Maneuverability, not so bad. 38.6 knots, fairly average speed for a destroyer, and we do have an engine boost, typical engine boost. So we can get this thing probably just above 40 knots. 700-meter turning circle, which is fine, and 5-second rudder shift. As for concealment, 5.9 kilometers by sea, but again, that is because I'm using the mortar skill, which nerfs the concealment in return for buffing the AP and HE alpha. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend this build, but what we have here is a destroyer that, because of its sonar gimmick, is highly specialized at dealing with other enemy destroyers. This thing is a good cap contester and just a good hunter of other DDs thanks to this sonar. The sonar is what really makes it possible. If not for that, then this would just be, I think, a very vanilla run-of-the-mill destroyer with okay torpedo power and okay main gun power. And for the majority of the match, when the sonar is on cooldown, or when you've expended all charges of it, that is sort of what this destroyer becomes. Note that even though we didn't get all 3 of the kills, we directly led to the deaths of all 3 of the enemy destroyers. I think the initial Shimakaze, he was spotted by our teammates. We ended up getting the killing blow, but had that teammate not been there, we could have deployed 1 charge of the sonar and made short work of that Shima. Sonar also helped us take out the Z-52 and the Kleber. So, in a way, we were responsible for the deaths of all 3 enemy destroyers, and I think that is the role of this particular vessel. It is a destroyer hunter. Can you get really good damage results with it against other ships like cruisers, battleships using the torpedoes, even the main guns? Sure, you can. But really, the draw of this thing is its counter DD abilities. As such, I think it's definitely worth picking up the Bureau project and getting this vessel. There's really not anything like it at the legendary tier. I mean, we have things like the Daring, for example, which also has a sonar, but the ship detection range of that sonar is something like 3 kilometers. It's more of a personal defense sonar meant for ensuring that you don't take any torpedoes in that particular ship. This is a sonar with much more offensive capabilities, and I think the Z-52 is by far and away the best of the original sort of German destroyer designs. I think a lot of people sort of overrate this sonar consumable. This really is the major highlight of the ship. Yes, it is exceptionally useful when you catch a destroyer inside of it. Their only recourse, especially if you're smoked up and you've got them in the sonar, is to run away and try to get out of range, which is difficult to do when the range is nearly 6 kilometers. But at the same time, without that consumable, you become a, I think, less desirable conventional destroyer. Without the sonar, in terms of countering other destroyers, I'd rather be playing the Gearing, the Kleber, even the Khabarovsk, just because their guns are so much better at dealing with other enemy destroyers. They have better HE, and I think they might even have better reload. Not really, maybe not the Kleber. Maybe with the reload booster it's something similar, but the Kleber's HE does like 2,000 damage per hit. This does only 1,600, so quite the difference. I think we could have won this game, potentially, too. Note all 3 of our destroyers on the blue team are alive, which is a huge achievement. It means really all the destroyer players in this battle on the blue side did a good job and understood their roles correctly. We could maybe wrap this up. In fact, one of our destroyer teammates is actually going to get a kill on an enemy battleship, which I think would have put us ahead on points and won us the game if that destroyer hadn't sunk. And really, it's make or break time. I feel like I should have been a little bit more aggressive here in trying to sink that Zhao. I don't know if I would have been able to take him out with the AP. This is no Felix Schultz or Elbing. I doubt we would be citadeling the Zhao from this kind of range, but we might be able to whittle down his HP enough. There goes the DD taking out the battleship. It's not quite enough, though. 893 to 901, and I think he gets spotted by the Zhao there and taken out by the Colombo. So that is the end of the game. It's a loss. But right up until the last second, it really wasn't clear who was going to win. And in retrospect, with the damage that we were doing against that Zhao, I think maybe if I had not gone behind that island and kept shooting at him, I might have lost that engagement. I might have sunk as well, and the result might have been the same. But I also might have sunk the Zhao, and then this might have been a win rather than a loss. But it wasn't. At least it was competitive, and that's really all you can ask for. And the Z-52, definitely a competitive destroyer. Highly recommended. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.